Early in the morning on November 20th, 1917, the usually quiet countryside of northern France was abruptly filled with the low, rumbling growl of engines. Moments later, under a fierce artillery bombardment, German soldiers defending the formidable Hindenburg Line looked out in horror as hundreds of Revolutionary War machines emerged from the mist. These machines, the tanks, would launch the first large-scale tank assault in history. This day marked a turning point in modern warfare, as seemingly impenetrable defenses were finally breached. Throughout that morning, the Allies made unprecedented gains, challenging traditional warfare tactics and ushering in a new era. However, these achievements came at a high cost. By late 1917, the Western Front was a grim landscape of struggle and exhaustion. The Allies had launched multiple offensives that year in determined efforts to dislodge German forces from occupied territories in Belgium and northern France. In April, the French forces attacked along the Chemin des Dames Ridge, and the British at Arras, but both offensives proved to be costly failures. In June, the Allies successfully captured the strategic Messines Ridge, opening the way for the massive Passchendaele offensive later that summer. However, during the next 3 grueling months, British and Allied forces battled relentlessly through Flanders' muddy quagmires, suffering hundreds of thousands of casualties for minimal ground gained. As winter approached, British High Command sought one last opportunity to close the year on a positive note. Hoping to uplift morale and maintain pressure on the beleaguered German forces, their attention turned to Cambrai, a relatively quiet sector in northern France that had largely avoided the ruinous effects of trench warfare. Unlike other battlefields that had been devastated by continuous fighting, Cambrai remained largely untouched, making it an ideal location for a novel approach to warfare: the mass deployment of tanks. The decision to use Cambrai as a testing ground wasn't based on its strategic importance. Instead, its relatively intact landscape and the element of surprise offered the perfect conditions to experiment with an innovative military tactic. In 1917, the standard strategy for assault involved sending infantry over the top of trenches, advancing behind a protective artillery barrage aimed at destroying barbed wire and enemy defenses ahead of the troops. However, this method had severe drawbacks. Firstly, the relentless shelling left the battlefield completely destroyed, making it difficult to transport supplies and maintain any forward momentum. Secondly, the slow-moving infantry became vulnerable to enemy counterattacks. And finally, these massive bombardments signaled the impending assault, eliminating any chance of surprise. Cambrai's assault was set to change all that. By using a large number of tanks to penetrate enemy defenses, the Allies could bypass the need for extended preliminary shelling. This new approach preserved the battlefield's terrain, enabled swift advancement, and retained the crucial element of surprise. At Cambrai, the tanks could not only break through the enemy's wire entanglements, but also engage hostile positions as they advance. These mechanical behemoths provided cover to the troops and were powerful enough to withstand small arms fire, though they faced challenges such as mechanical breakdowns. Interestingly, early tanks were often named to give them identity, and crews saw them as companions in battle. To-51, Deborah was one of these tanks, assigned a name to embody courage and resilience. This battle highlighted both the potential and the limitations of tanks in combat. While the technology had proven revolutionary, the tanks of 1917 were still prone to mechanical issues and were limited by the rough battlefield terrain. Yet the success at Cambrai laid the foundation for tank warfare, leading to developments that would make tanks an essential part of military strategy in the years to come. Cambrai marked a significant milestone in military history. It wasn't the first instance of tanks on the battlefield, but it was the first time they were used in such large numbers across favorable terrain, offering a new edge in the Great War. Yet the tanks of 1917 were far from the agile armored vehicles we know today. These machines presented both a fearsome asset and a dangerous assignment for the brave men who operated them. By 1917, the latest British tank variant in use was the Mark V. Weighing a hefty 28 tons, it was a metal behemoth, crewed by 8 men who faced extreme conditions within its armored shell. The Mark V came in 2 versions: the mail tank, equipped with 2 6-pounder naval guns mounted on sponsons on each side, designed to target fortified enemy positions like pillboxes, and the female variant, which boasted 6 rapid-firing Lewis guns intended for infantry suppression and clearing trenches. This variety in armament allowed the British to use tanks in versatile ways, supporting both anti-infantry and anti-fortification roles. Interestingly, the Mark V's armor was only about 12 millimeters thick at its maximum, which provided some protection against small arms fire. However, visibility for the crew was limited due to narrow viewing slits, making navigation and target acquisition challenging. Serving as a tank crew member in 1917 was nothing short of perilous. The Mark V's maximum speed was just 4 miles per hour, about the same as a soldier on foot. This sluggish pace made it an easy target for enemy fire. Furthermore, the tank's engine, situated in the main compartment, released high levels of carbon monoxide, putting crew members at risk of poisoning if they stayed in the sealed environment too long. This exhaust-filled atmosphere, combined with engine heat, often raised the temperature inside the tank to 50 degrees Celsius, 122 degrees Fahrenheit, pushing the limits of human endurance. To add to their woes, the tank's steel armor had a tendency to splinter when hit by bullets, sending sharp, hot metal shards, known as spall or splash, flying around the interior. Crews would wear chainmail masks, which resembled medieval armor, to protect themselves from these razor-sharp fragments. These unique hazards required extreme resilience and bravery from the men who operated these early war machines. Historical records give us a glimpse into the lives of the tank crews who faced such dangers. Among those who operated the D-51 tank, known to her crew as Deborah, were young men who displayed remarkable courage and endurance. One of these men was Frank Gustav Heap, a 24-year-old from Blackpool, England. Frank was the only son of a well-respected justice of the peace, and he had grown up with privilege and opportunity. Despite this, he volunteered to serve in the tank corps, understanding the risks involved in operating these new machines on the battlefield. Frank Heap's story continued to develop in Cambridge, where in July 1910 he attended the prestigious Lay School. There, he proved himself both academically driven and bold in spirit. During his father's visit, Frank received a prize for his performance on university entrance exams, a proud moment that reflected his studious nature. However, a newspaper article from September 1912 reveals another side of him. Frank crashed his 2-cylinder Indian motorcycle, an accident that left him unconscious, though he was fortunate to avoid serious injury. His daring streak was clear even then, foreshadowing his willingness to join the Army in 1914 as a motorcycle dispatch rider. Later, he earned a commission in the Tank Corps, eventually taking command of the tank Deborah. Among Deborah's 8-man crew was Joseph William Chavon, a man whose background sheds light on the sacrifices of the working class during the war. Census records from 1901 show that Joseph, then 3 years old, lived in Mildenhall, Suffolk, one of 4 children to Rhoda Chavon, who was listed as married but without her husband present. Later, a school admission record from 1905 notes that Joseph left school after a brief enrollment as the family relocated. By 1911, Joseph's father, a coppersmith, was back with the family, residing at 73 Thoday Street in a modest neighborhood of Cambridge. It was from this household that young Joseph, like so many others, would depart to join the army when war erupted in 1914. He landed in France on September 29, 1915, eventually serving as a gunner in the Tank Corps. Thanks to historical trench maps, overlaying them onto modern satellite imagery provides a unique look at the battlefield around Cambrai. The attack zone for the upcoming offensive stretched across well-defined features, helping us understand the battlefield's physical constraints. Bounded by 2 canals, the Canal du Nord to the northwest and the Saint-Quentin Canal to the right flank. The terrain was shaped by these waterways. The Canal du Nord, unfinished at the time, had steep, dry banks that effectively limited the movement of troops on the left flank. The Saint-Quentin Canal, still operational, wound northward before turning westward across the battlefield. These canals made certain crossings crucial, and the bridge at Manières became a key strategic objective. The primary goal of the Cambrai assault was to pierce a 6-mile section of German defenses, secure the high ground at Bourlon Wood, cross the Saint-Quentin Canal, and finally unleash a wave of British cavalry. This would allow them to encircle Cambrai, capturing its vital supply hubs and isolating German forces. But achieving this required breaking through the formidable Hindenburg Line, a defense system that was virtually impregnable. Constructed in late 1916 and occupied by German forces early in 1917, the Hindenburg Line was a masterpiece of defense engineering. This system included several trench lines, each interlocked with the next and fortified with vast fields of barbed wire. In some areas, barbed wire belts stretched as deep as 50 yards, creating nearly impenetrable barriers for traditional infantry attacks. The Hindenburg Line reflected a tactical shift in German military thinking. Unlike the traditional expectation of fixed front lines, this line was designed as a layered, defense-in-depth system that could absorb and repel multiple waves of attackers, buying time for reinforcements. In addition, the lines were carefully placed to create overlapping fields of fire, meaning that troops moving forward would encounter sustained, well-coordinated fire from multiple directions. The German defenses near Cambrai were exceptionally fortified, with villages like Anu, Marcoing, and Flesquières serving as critical strongholds. Positioned both in and behind these villages, German artillery batteries lay in carefully concealed placements, ready to unleash a barrage on advancing British troops and tanks. British strategists, in turn, divided the battlefield into three main objective lines. First was the Blue Line, encompassing the German forward defenses, also known as the outpost zone. Once the British broke through this line, they would face the main Hindenburg Line and support trenches, pushing through the village of Flesquières toward the Brown Line. Beyond the Brown Line lay the vital bridge at Masnieres, the village of Marcoing, and Bourlon Wood, where British forces hoped to unleash their cavalry to complete the encirclement of Cambrai. It was an ambitious plan, but every step needed precise execution. The troops in their Roll 7 British divisions were designated for the Cambrai assault, with the 51st Highlanders and the 62nd British Division taking a lead role in the sector of focus. Supporting these divisions were almost the entire British tank force, an impressive 476 tanks, which would attempt to breach the German defenses and carve a path through the Hindenburg Line. Among them was the tank Deborah, crewed by Frank Heap and his men from 12th Company D Battalion of the Tank Corps. They were assigned to the 2nd Assault Wave with orders to take Flesquières and advance toward the Brown Line. The logistics behind maneuvering such a vast number of tanks covertly were formidable. On November 13th, records show that Tank D-51 and several others from 12 Company boarded a train at Arras, bound for Plateau Rail Yard, where they arrived in the early hours of November 14th. From here, secrecy was paramount. The tanks moved in darkness to a temporary hiding spot in Beaumont's Wood, where they waited until November 16th before mounting another train to advance closer to the front lines. After disembarking, they traveled approximately 9 miles in total darkness to a position in Havrincourt Wood, now less than 3,000 yards from the British front line. Here, over 100 tanks gathered under cover, awaiting the command to attack. For the men like Frank Heap, the days spent in Havrincourt Wood were filled with tension, boredom, and a sense of foreboding about the coming assault. They could hardly move during the day to avoid being spotted, and resupply of critical items like fuel, oil, grease, and ammunition had to occur under the cover of night. In the days leading up to the assault, the men's lives were dominated by rigorous preparations, briefings, and silent anticipation of the battle ahead. Yet there was a moment of levity that offered some relief from the heavy atmosphere. For the crew of Deborah, the final hours of waiting before the assault were marked by subdued camaraderie and shared anticipation. Gunner Joseph Shevin, who was turning 20 the next day, received quiet congratulations from his crewmates, with promises of a proper celebration once the battle was over. By 9:30 p.m., the infantry began moving into position in the frontline trenches, and at around that time, orders were given for the tanks to prepare. 15 minutes later, Deborah's engine roared to life. Concealed by the night and covered by the sound of aircraft overhead, Deborah joined the line of tanks rolling out of Havrincourt Wood, ready to take their place 150 yards behind the leading wave. If everything went according to plan, D-51, fighting alongside 2 other tanks, would advance about 30 minutes after the initial wave, aiming to leapfrog through Flesquières and secure the Brown Line. The last minutes of waiting felt interminable as final orders were passed around and crews exchanged words of encouragement. As dawn broke, the tension reached its peak until, at precisely 6:20 a.m., a devastating artillery bombardment thundered into the German positions. The shells, numbering in the thousands, exploded in rapid succession, creating thick clouds of dust and smoke that merged with the morning mist, providing cover for the advancing troops and tanks. Under this cloak of dust and fog, the first tanks pushed forward, equipped with wooden fascines designed to cross trenches. Leading this assault in the Cambrai sector were 6 specialized tanks, tasked with clearing the barbed wire obstacles that shielded the German defenses. The tactic proved effective. Within minutes, vast swathes of wire had been flattened, allowing the first wave of infantry to surge through and capture the stunned German outposts. Those defenders who hadn't already fled or surrendered fought bravely but were swiftly overwhelmed. Watching this initial advance unfold from behind, Second Lieutenant Frank Heap and the crew of Deborah had a clear view of history in the making. They witnessed dozens of tanks advancing abreast, disappearing into the mist as they led the first large-scale tank assault in military history. But Heap and his crew wouldn't be spectators for long. Soon Heap signaled to his driver, and Deborah rumbled forward to join the fray. The first wave of tanks moved like an unstoppable force, breaching the German front line and crashing through the support trenches. Tanks dropped their fascines into the trenches, forming temporary bridges for the next vehicles to cross without becoming mired. Although the attack had gone according to plan, mechanical issues began to plague some tanks, as breakdowns, shell craters, and even the treacherous German trenches claimed a few machines. Despite these setbacks, within 90 minutes of the initial assault, the lead tanks reached the Blue Line, securing the Grand Ravine in the process. This marked a critical achievement, opening the way for Deborah and the second wave. D-51 and the other second wave tanks paused briefly to reorganize. Around 8:35 a.m., after the artillery began shelling Flesquières, Deborah and the tanks in Heap's section prepared for the next assault. Their first objective, 2 trenches on the southern edge of the village. Through the tiny vision slits in their tank, Heap and his men surveyed the battlefield, facing gently rising terrain that concealed both challenges and danger. Yet unknown to the British, this short delay allowed the German defenders to regroup as well. Reinforcements flooded into Flesquières, while concealed German artillery prepared to confront the advancing tanks with fierce resistance. The stage was set for a brutal showdown as Deborah and her crew moved toward a battle that would test their mettle to the utmost. With the tanks of D and E battalions advancing across the fields, the tension rose as they approached the village of Flesquières. Due to the dense trees near the village's edge, D Company maneuvered westward to encircle Flesquières, while E Company, along with Deborah, veered east. The assault began with D Company's tanks firing 6-pound shells and machine guns directly into the Hindenburg support line in Flesquières Trench, softening enemy defenses. Supported by infantry, they advanced quickly. Yet this successful advance was tragically interrupted. Unknown to the attackers, a concealed German artillery battery lay in wait near the crossroads at the western edge of Flesquières. As D Company's tanks emerged from cover, this battery opened fire, scoring direct hits and disabling 8 tanks. The vulnerable infantry, now without the tank's protective firepower, found themselves pinned down by machine gun fire. The attack stalled just outside the village. Meanwhile, to the east, Deborah and the rest of E Company advanced over the high ground near the Hindenburg support line. Suddenly, they too faced a brutal barrage from concealed German artillery. In mere minutes, 7 of the 8 tanks in Deborah's sector were struck, reducing the British forces' effectiveness significantly. With no tanks left to clear the way, the infantry found themselves entangled in barbed wire and subjected to withering gunfire, suffering heavy losses. Yet amidst the destruction, one tank continued the fight. Deborah. Advancing closer to the village, Deborah managed to avoid direct artillery hits and soon reached the outskirts of Flesquières. Heap and his men pressed forward, pushing their lone tank through the streets, firing relentlessly and sowing confusion among the German defenders. The sight of this isolated tank advancing boldly into enemy territory sent the Germans scrambling, allowing Deborah's crew to secure a critical foothold near the town crossroads. As they fought on, Deborah's crew fired over 4,000 rounds, exhausting their ammunition as they advanced another 250 yards toward the edge of the village. For a brief moment, they glimpsed the open fields of the Brown Line, their ultimate objective. But as they cleared the last building, they found themselves exposed to the full view of two artillery batteries stationed nearby. Within seconds, the tanks sustained multiple hits, leaving the interior in chaos. Lance Corporal George Foote, gunners Joe Chevron, and William Guy succumbed instantly as shells pierced the tank's armor. Deborah was consumed by flames, her journey cut short. Despite Deborah's sacrifice, the overall battle for Cambrai pressed on. British forces made some gains, capturing ground up to 6 miles deep in some areas, and demonstrating the feasibility of large-scale tank assaults. However, the campaign's initial success could not be sustained, as German forces launched effective counterattacks in December, ultimately returning the front lines to their original positions. The Battle of Cambrai exacted a severe toll, with nearly 12,000 casualties on both sides. Although the immediate strategic impact was limited, the legacy of the battle would shape future warfare. Over the following decades, the story of the battle faded, but one tank's legacy would eventually be unearthed. In the 1990s, historian Filip Gorsinski, inspired by local tales, uncovered evidence suggesting one of the tanks remained buried near Flesquières. After extensive research, a team conducted a dig in November 1998 and discovered Deborah, who had lain undisturbed for over 80 years. Restored to near-original condition, Deborah became a testament to the Battle of Cambrai and a symbol of the tank's role in modern warfare. By 2018, she was transferred to a dedicated museum close to the very ground where her journey ended, offering visitors a glimpse into the heroic struggle she and her crew endured. As for Deborah's crew, records show that 3 men survived her final stand. Lance Corporal David Marsden, believed to be Deborah's driver, was wounded during the battle but returned home and lived until 1969. Second Lieutenant Frank Heap, Deborah's commander, displayed remarkable courage, leading the surviving crew members through enemy territory to safety, earning him the Military Cross for his valor. Heap returned home and later ran a hotel in Blackpool. Yet he always remembered the battle's cost and those who did not return. For the men who perished, their memory endures in Flesquières Hill British Cemetery, where they lie close to the tank that had been both their shield and their grave. Today, Deborah stands proudly in the Flesquières Museum, a tribute to the bravery and sacrifice of her crew, and a silent witness to one of World War I's pivotal battles.